COVID-19, better known as coronavirus, has spread throughout the world. Symptoms of this respiratory disease may include fever, cough, and shortness of breath. These symptoms may show up 2 to 14 days after exposure. If you are experiencing these symptoms and have come into contact or are in an area with an ongoing outbreak, please call a hotline and/or consult with a physician. Clean and disinfect high-touch surfaces. For more information, please visit cdc.gov/COVID-19. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Dr. Betsy Greenleaf, Premier Pelvic Health Expert and Women's Wellness Warrior. I'm the host of Some of Your Parts podcast. As you may already know, we're interrupting our normal scheduled podcasts to bring you a series on COVID-19 care, how to survive during our time of coronavirus and quarantine. I have specialists ranging from those to cover information about the virus to those on how to deal with communication, well-being, wellness, and mental health. So join me in listening to these over the next few days. Thank you. Stay well. In today's show, we will be talking with Dr. Aimie Apigian, a preventive medicine physician in Southern California. She's dedicated her life to helping those who want to heal and live their best life ever. She adopted her son while in medical school at Loma Linda University. He was 4 years old when he came into her life and had already been in over 20 placements. She thought with time, stability, and lots of love, he would be fine. Well, he continued to struggle, and she did not want the medications conventional medicine had to offer, and traditional therapy was not helping. So she committed to helping him be happy, healthy, and feel loved, and realized his issues were biological, not physiological. Trauma is stored in the body and becomes our biology. To live our best lives and be at our optimal health, we have to identify the trauma patterns we all have in us from life and rewire our nervous system for security. We need to optimize our vagus nerve for its ability to stay and live in the parasympathetic state where we are mentally, emotionally, and physically at our best. In addition to her master's in public health and a master's in biochemistry, she is a trained functional medicine and addiction specialist. She is certified in different trauma therapies, including somatic experience and trauma art narrative therapy. She loves being on the cutting edge of science and medicine and applying it to identifying and rewiring trauma in children and adults. She runs a 2-month online course and 3-day intensives in Southern California for women, teaching them the essential fundamentals for accelerating their or their child's healing journey from trauma. She has written a roadmap to accelerating the rewiring of trauma. I'm very excited to invite with us today Dr. Aimie. So today I have with us Dr. Aimie Apigian. Thank you, Dr. Aimie, for being with us today.
Absolutely. Thank you.
So normally you're dealing in the hospitals with addiction and some mental trauma, but eventually we're going to talk here about how like the biology of uncertainty. But just if you could just bring up some of the things that you're seeing right now in your day-to-day life, in your practice, that people aren't thinking about when we're all dealing with the coronavirus.
Sure. So yes, part of my practice is addiction medicine. And so I run a detox unit. And what I'm seeing as I'm talking with the people coming in and other patients of mine is that there's an increase right now in overdoses. And for those people who have become dependent on, especially the opiates, and so whether that's pain pills or fentanyl or even the heroin, those are the highest risk for overdoses in general. And what we're seeing right now is that because of this time of uncertainty, it is very uncomfortable, and there are more overdoses as they are using their coping mechanisms to deal with the stress of the uncertainty. And then on the other hand, though, you have people in this population who have nowhere else to go right now, no resources available to them. And so they're now choosing to come into detox, whereas before maybe, it wasn't great, but it was okay for right now. And now they're being pushed to make that decision. And so they're all coming into detox right now. And because of COVID-19, a lot of the treatment centers are not accepting new patients right now. And so there's no place for them to go for long-term placement, long-term recovery, even 12-step meetings, right? Like those are
Oh
typically large
gosh.
groups. And so everything right now has either been shut down or they're trying to make it all online, which is great if you have those resources. And it's a real struggle if you're, someone who has not had those resources and can't even get online to attend meetings. And so yeah, it's really interesting for me to see. Like I know that there's so much focus right now on COVID-19 and all of the people being affected by that, which I think that there's more of that to develop with time. But with my current work, like I'm seeing this affecting so many other areas of our healthcare system, of our social system. And I think that this is where, kind of after the initial notice and all the attention on COVID-19, it's going to shift to these other things of how else has this affected our social system and our healthcare system that are unsustainable. Like this is not sustainable, and this is a really good time for us, just as a culture, as a society, to sit back and be like, how comfortable are we with uncertainty? Because people are not dealing with it well, right? Like
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
I'm seeing the different posts from people, and there's a lot of people who are talking about how much they're eating, right? And
Yes.
that's another coping mechanism for uncertainty and boredom. And so, yeah, just in general, we still are not comfortable with uncertainty, and that comes back to all of like my other work that I do around trauma and how trauma is stored in our body and the nervous system. And during times of stress, it will come up, it will come to the surface. And so for me, this is a great opportunity for us to see where are those places where we still need to do some healing, some rewiring of our health, of our biology, in order to be more comfortable in times of stress and not have our health and our social systems affected as much.
And that's such a great point because, somebody also mentioned the other day to me that life is uncertain all the time. The
Yes,
only difference is that our uncertainty is now being shoved in our face and we're
yes,
all being having to face it all at once. And so it just brings up so much more for us as humanity in the whole.
mhm.
So,
Yeah, so we have like a window of tolerance where we can, each one of us, based on our biology and the different traumas that have been stored in our body, we have this window of tolerance for the amount of stress and uncertainty that we can handle. And anything outside of that window really takes us for a spin and puts us into coping mechanisms every single time, across the board. I mean, this is just human biology. And so when we are faced with a time like this, it's really interesting to see just, hey, what am I doing? Where is my window? Right? Like, have I been able to increase the size of my window with time, or am I still stuck in my narrow window? And yeah, this is taking me way out of my comfort zone to the point where I'm back in old coping mechanisms that I thought were, long gone. And here they are again.
and I didn't even think about, the fact that this could be triggering, addiction and worsening of just unhealthy coping mechanisms with so many of us. I mean, I know that for myself, like I definitely am a stress eater. Like I could admit to that. So I'm keep reaching for my comfort foods, which are my simple carbs and my sugars,
Yep.
which on a whole is probably the worst thing I could be doing for my body right now because that's going to affect my immune system. So I keep now, like after like a couple days of like eating cookies and cakes, probably straight, that I went, whoa, 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 this is not the time to be doing this. I
Mhm.
need to go get to be something, do something healthier.
Sure.
But what can people do to really kind of look at how they're dealing with things and then try to get back on the right track?
Right. Yeah. So probably the first thing is just to notice, and again, I mentioned that window of tolerance, and that window of tolerance, really, I'm referencing the different states of our nervous system. It's actually a very biological process, and so there's three different states of your nervous system, and that window of tolerance is called your parasympathetic, also called your social engagement system, where at baseline you feel secure, you feel safe and secure. Not to say that you don't have, like the sense of aliveness and energy, and even have some sense of threat sometimes, but it doesn't take you over into high vigilance and I'm not okay. And what happens with that is that you go into this, what's the sympathetic state, and it's this really high energy. And it's a high energy state that's intended to save us from actual danger. And so you have the adrenaline that's released, you have then the cortisol that's released over time as well. And it's intended to help us run away from bears, run away from, actual dangers that have our life threatened. But what happens is that when that becomes overwhelming, and we don't think that we will actually survive, like we may actually not be okay, then that's when we actually go into a collapse. And this is where we talk about like the polyvagal theory and how the vagus nerve, which goes from your brainstem behind your esophagus all the way down to your stomach and then branches out through your whole digestive system, that holds the key to this collapse. And it's the freeze response. Many of us don't recognize it as the freeze response because we think that we'll actually just stand there frozen, and that's not true. The freeze response is just where we have that I'm giving up. I'm giving in. I feel helpless. I feel like nothing is in my control. And it puts you in a bit of a victim mentality. So if those are the thoughts that you're having, this is a really good time to just notice, like, oh, this is where my nervous system is. Because once you know which state your nervous system is in, then you can use tools, coping mechanisms, healthy coping mechanisms, in order to get back into that window of tolerance. But if you don't even recognize when you're in these different states, then that's where the danger lies, because it does take a toll on your immune system greatly, and your hormonal system, like your digestive system. Everything is affected by these different states of your nervous system because they're survival states. And when we go into survival, everything, like our whole biology, shifts towards surviving this threat. And so every system in our body is towards now leaning towards survival rather than health and feeling safe and secure. And so that's always the first step, is just recognizing, based on your thoughts, based on your mood, and based on your coping mechanisms, right? Those are really good ways for us to know, like this is where my stress level is. It's high, or it's been so high that it's put me into a collapse and I just kind of don't care. I just want to stay in my pajamas and watch movies and zone out. Zoning out is the freeze response in a human body. And so these are all ways that we can start to identify when we're in these different survival states, and then work towards bringing it back into the parasympathetic, where we will be our healthiest to fight whatever infections. Mm-hmm.
So these steps or these stages, are they considered pretty normal for people to go through when they're facing such uncertainty?
Yeah, so uncertainty is definitely a threat, right? And it's even more of a threat because we don't know what it is exactly, right? When we're faced with a car accident and a car is coming towards us, we are very clear on what the threat is, and we are very clear on what we need to do. We need to get our car out of the way, we need to brace. Like, our action steps are very clear. But in this type of situation, it does tend to be more overwhelming just because we can't grasp it. We don't even understand what action steps we should take. And there's so much information being thrown at us that even that is overwhelming. And so, uncertainty, even more than other threats, puts us into that freeze response because it becomes overwhelming sooner than other types of what you might just call stress or threats. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I notice, like, at least amongst myself and friends, I think there's a tendency to become very judgmental about ourselves,
Yeah.
about like, oh, I'm not keeping it together.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not being able to like function and, you
Mm-hmm.
know, there's these internal dialogues that are going on with
Sure.
ourselves, and then there's also the like externalizing it to being very judgmental of other people. Like, I can't believe that person bought off all the toilet paper, which I still don't understand the toilet paper thing, but but
I'm right there with you.
yeah. So what kind of how do we deal with those, that like internal
Yeah.
talking that happens like
Yeah.
both ways?
Yes. And I'm so glad you're bringing that up because it's really easy to go into the shame. And there's a whole biology of shame, right? Like we think that it's just an emotion or we think that it's just thoughts. No, it is our biology. It actually changes how the cells are processing, making the energy, mitochondrial on the DNA level. Like this is our biology. And so shame is part of this freeze response. And so all the more so when you're having these thoughts of I'm not good enough, right? Like that is a thought that comes out of the freeze response, and I'm overwhelmed and I just can't take it anymore. And so I'm going to lash out, give me space, back up, right? That's all part of this survival response. And so when we're there, it's I mean, I have found that the best way to get back towards a parasympathetic state, which is where we want to be,
Yeah.
is to acknowledge it, right? Like, wow, I see myself, whatever it is, I see myself lashing out at the people I love the most. I see myself uh, binge watching movies right now, and I hate that I do that. I wish that I were using this time more productively. Whatever it is, right? It's really helpful to frame it as wow, if this is what I'm doing, I must be feeling so much stress that I don't see any other way of handling the stress.
Yeah.
Okay. So then that gives us new context in terms of what it is that you're actually doing and how this is serving you rather than just hating yourself and keeping yourself further into the survival and the freeze patterns. Mhm. And part of the freeze response is this numbing effect. And that's really why it is part of our biology. And yes, it's a very neurobiological pattern that happens where you're in the parasympathetic, you see a threat, you go sympathetic, it becomes overwhelming, you go into the freeze. Like this is biology 101. And so there's not much that you can do to change that, but what we can do are the different using the different tools to stay in that parasympathetic window and then get back into there. And one of the things about the freeze response and why it's part of our biology is that it does have this numbing effect for us where we actually don't feel the full intensity of the stress.
Wow. Okay.
And when something has become overwhelming, that's what our body and our brain is trying to do to help us survive. And so while it feels like giving up, giving in, laying there in our pajamas, binge watching and, binge eating, right? That's what it looks like on the surface. But internally, what's happening is that your brain, your body has decided that the best way to get through this overwhelming stress is to just bring down the intensity of it through these coping mechanisms that help numb the level of stress that you felt in the first place. And so until that can process through, it really is helping us survive the situation by again just bringing down the intensity of the stress. And so when we see ourselves going back to these old coping mechanisms that we hate ourselves for, that's why it's really helpful to just frame it like that. Wow, like this must have been so much stress for me, so overwhelming for my system that it saw no other way to deal with it other than to numb the amount of stress that it was feeling.
And I think that's a really good point for all of us to understand, is that we are the system of biochemicals and
We are.
electrical,
Right.
reactions that happen in our body.
Right.
And as much as we want to realize that we're like think that we're in control of everything, that there's going to be things that are just happening
Yes.
because that's what it means to be human. So,
And So this is like our limbic system taking over. Our survival system is our limbic system. It's a very subconscious system. So, and that's the beauty of the survival. And so when we notice ourselves doing things that our rational brain does not understand or does not like, that's another great sign that, hey, we are in the survival biology right now. Because when we're in the parasympathetic, we have full access to our brain. We can be logical, we can be emotional, and they can be well balanced, right? We can access both of them freely. We're flexible. But once we go into that survival biology, and again, it's a subconscious flip of the switch, like you say. there's nothing we can do at that point in order to stop our bodies and our brains from going to that survival place. But it's a very deep limbic decision of this has been overwhelming, and it changes our biochemistry in that moment, sending this communication down the vagus nerve, shutting down different systems of our body just to hibernate and just to, kind of lay low in order to just get through this.
So it sounds like to me that like one of the first things that we can be doing is just recognizing this and
Yeah.
accepting this.
Accepting it with grace.
Okay.
Grace for
Yeah.
ourselves, right? And this is where, and I know this sounds cliche-ish, right? But be gentle with yourself. And the reason is that the more we beat ourselves up, the longer we stay in the shame and the freeze response. And so it really is more helpful to just acknowledge it, call it out for what it is. I'm doing coping mechanisms that I wish that I would not be doing. Okay, got it. And this means that this has been so stressful for me, more than what I realized. Okay, now we can actually get some clarity on what we can do, because we know how to handle stress, right? Like once you call it stress, okay, I know how to handle stress. I know to reach out to friends. I know to do yoga. I know to meditate. I know to read a book. I know to turn off the TV. I know to go on a walk. I know how to handle stress, but I hadn't called it stress yet. I was just feeling really overwhelmed and uncertain about everything that's going on right now.
And when we go into like, all right, once we recognize that it's stress and we can try to start doing some of these other relaxation techniques or
Yeah,
coping mechanisms, how does that change things for us? Like, why does that make it better?
right. What we're trying to do is get back into that parasympathetic nervous system state. And so, how you know that you're there is you're going to have deep, full breaths that are spontaneous. So, I'm all for doing breath work. That's fine. Go for it. But it's actually the spontaneous deep breaths that to me show me that you are now back into the parasympathetic. And so it's going to be a process. And I don't want to give the impression that, oh, you just think some relaxing thoughts and woo, just like that, your biology is back into parasympathetic. It often can take a few days. And so once a person has gone into the freeze response, it is on a time clock, just like in the animal kingdom. When an animal goes into the freeze response, like an opossum or a deer, it's on a time clock, and it will come out of that freeze response at a certain time. Same thing with our bodies. And so once we notice, like, whoa, I've really gone all the way into the freeze response, just write it out, right? Be gentle with yourself. Know that you're going to have some dark thoughts, some dark moods. It's okay. Just get through it and be telling yourself that, right? Like, I'm going to get through this. And once I'm through this, then I'm going to go for a walk and do these things that maybe right now I don't even have the energy for, but it's okay. And so those are the messages that you're going to start to give yourself, is just like, yeah, I'm doing this. And for right now, it's okay. For right now, I'm going to be okay. Right now, no one is around me that has the COVID-19. I'm okay. Right. And so those are what you keep reminding yourself. And then with that, with time, you'll feel your whole body shift back into the parasympathetic. And then you'll feel your brain come back on. You'll feel that, like I'm back into reason. I can
Yes.
reason again
Yeah.
and I can plan and I have motivation. That's when you know that you're back in the parasympathetic.
And I think a lot of us are going to we're all going to be going through something different with
Absolutely.
this.
Yes.
But is there things that we can do if we see loved ones that are struggling
Hmm. Hmm.
other than making them listen to this and watch this?
That is a hard one. That is a hard one because we all want to help,
Yeah.
and sometimes not knowing better, we do things that are not helpful. And so the most helpful thing that we can do is very similar to what we would do for ourselves. Not nitpick,
Yeah.
not judge, but at the same time protect ourselves, right? So I don't want to give the impression that, oh, if they're in some way hurting you, just be okay with it because that's their coping mechanism. No, right? No, that's not what I'm saying. But as long as it's not affecting and hurting other people, just kind of notice it and be like, wow, I'm noticing how stressful this must be for you. And I just want to let you know that if there's something I can do to support you, let me know. Rather than automatically doing things for them, because once again, they're already in kind of that victim nervous system state. I mean, it's just a nervous system state. There's no judgment around it. It's just where your nervous system goes, where they get to the point where they feel like they have no control. So it's pointless. It's meaningless to even try to do something. And so you don't want to jump in there and be their savior. They need to pull themselves out of that and get to a place of empowerment themselves. But at the same time, we can be there to support. So this is kind of where I call the difference between, sympathy and empathy. I am not here to sympathize with you, and I don't want you to feel sorry for me either. But to know that you understand, now that makes a difference, right? That you're going to be by my side until I can do it myself. Now that is cool. Thank you, right? Because if you do everything for me, I'm not going to feel good about myself anyway. It's going to keep me in that, you're right, I can't do anything for myself type of victim state of the freeze response. And so being empathic, being support rather than going into sympathy or codependency are really the most helpful things that you can do if you see a family member struggling. Hmm.
And I think the great point about this is there is always some good that comes out of things that
Yeah,
are stressful. And I think because we're all under such incredible stress, we're all kind of reaching out and looking for new techniques to try to
yeah,
deal.
right,
And these are things that this is going to carry, like learning these skills are going to carry over into life once life gets back to normal.
right.
So,
Very much so. Like, I really do see this as an opportunity for those people who enjoy healing on a more deeper personal level. Like, this is an awesome opportunity because all of your insecurities are coming up to the surface, right? This is triggering all kinds of insecurities. Awesome. This is the time then that you can actually work with those insecurities, find out where are those coming from, what are they about, and then do the work to rewire those insecurities for safety and the parasympathetic social engagement state. Because otherwise, you go to therapy and you're trying to dig around and try to find stuff. It's all right here on the surface right now. So, yeah, this is actually a great time to do the trauma and personal work for those who enjoy that and are looking for that in their life.
do you have any resources that come to mind just for things and ways to improve coping mechanisms?
Yes, absolutely. So for me, I mean, I see all of this stuff that some people would normally see as psychology. I see it as biology. And so, one of the more important things that you can do is be looking at your diet and your exercise and what are you doing to optimize your health, decrease your inflammation, because all of those things are going to affect your nervous system. And if your nervous system is not being given the optimal environment for it to thrive, it's going to reach that line of overwhelm even sooner. And so that is really how you make that window of tolerance bigger for yourself, is by doing all of this health stuff to intentionally optimize your nervous system. And so diet is a really big one. And I mean, I'm certainly able to give more information on this, but when you are in a time of stress, now is not the time to try to be doing a ketogenic diet. Like, that is the worst thing for your nervous system. In times of safety and security, absolutely, yes, a ketogenic diet is the healthiest for your nervous system. But when you are in stress, your brain, your body has to run on carbohydrates. Now, which carbohydrates you choose, now that's a different matter, right? There are pro-inflammatory carbohydrates that we definitely want to stay away from. But just understanding, like, there are changes that you can do in order to optimize your nervous system, whether in times of good times or in times of stress, that you can be very intentional about building. I mean, this is building resilience for stress. And that's really what we're talking about when it comes to uncertainty, is building that resilience, your capacity to hold a larger amount of uncertainty and not resort to unhealthy coping mechanisms.
Those are such great recommendations. Thank you so much. Is there anything that you can think of that I did not ask you that you'd like to mention? It's always a trick question.
It is. It is. I mean, what's been coming up for me a lot lately, and for a lot of people, is that they're stuck at home. And if they don't live alone, if they have a family, here they are with people. And so they have that resource, and yet that's often becoming the trigger for some of their insecurities and lashing out and coping mechanisms. And so that would be kind of what I would challenge people and want to really encourage them to do, is find ways to, whatever social contact you have at the moment, really try to use that in a positive way, because touch, connection, attunement, those are some of the most powerful things that we have to build resilience into our biology. And so I would really challenge people who are stuck at home with family members who are driving them crazy, find ways in which to just shift that a bit, so that they are actually, that's a resource for them, and that's a way for them to build their capacity to handle more stress rather than it being more stress for them.
Such a good point. That's amazing. Where can people find out more information about you?
Sure. So, Trauma Healing Accelerated is the program that I run. It's an online course for both women, and then I run an online course for parents. And so, yeah, that's what I love doing, is finding ways in which we can accelerate a person's rewiring of these trauma patterns and insecurities in ways where we can focus on the biology and be very intentional and get a lot more done and accelerate that process. So, traumahealingaccelerated.com.
Great. Thank you so much, Dr. Aimie, for being with us today. And I hope you and your family stay well.
Thank you. Yours as well.
Today's episode was brought to you by the Pelvic Floor Store, your source for personal health. You can find us at www.pelvicfloorstore.com. For more information on today's episode and women's wellness, please go to drbetsygreenleaf.com.